Afternoon session that we will have featuring Paulette Brown and Eileen Letts. Hopefully you all had a lovely networking session and have enjoyed the morning session so far. We are really excited with how everyone seems to be receiving this conference on the platform, and hopefully everyone's having a great experience. If you do run into any issues, you can certainly hit up our tech support team people. They're at tables throughout, so if you have any questions, please definitely reach out to them. One last bit of housekeeping before we jump into today's conversation about long-term careers of women in color in the legal profession. You should have received your ballot to vote for board of director members earlier today. Please remember that your votes are due by 5:00 p.m. Eastern time. So again, your votes must be in by 5:00 Eastern time. And with that, I am very honored to introduce two fantastic women who have blazed trails in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal industry. The first being Ms. Paulette Brown, who is the first woman of color to lead the American Bar Association in history. She's a partner at Lawler, LLP, and is just an all-around fantastic person. Ms. Paulette, as I and others like to call her, was responsible for governance, advocacy, and serving as the voice and face of the ABA, which is comprised of over 400,000 members, lawyer members. Let's see. As a result of her initiatives as president, 7 major policies were developed and approved by the ABA's governing bodies that will have a long-lasting impact on diversity and inclusion in the legal profession and the justice system. Ms. Paulette simultaneously served as chair of the Labor and Employment section of the New Jersey State Bar Association, becoming the first person of color to hold that position in 140 years. Ms. Paulette also served as president of the National Bar Association and has led a delegation to monitor the first free and democratic elections in South Africa. She currently serves as the chair of the Africa Council for the ABA's Rule of Law Initiative. For her extensive work in Africa, Ms. Paulette received from the National Bar Association the inaugural Ron Brown Award. She's a senior partner and chief diversity and inclusion officer, as I mentioned, at Locke, and she's been engaged in the practice of law for more than 40 years. Prior to her current role, she served in numerous legal capacities, including a number of in-house positions and as a municipal court judge. Ms. Paulette is nationally recognized for her dedication and efforts relating to diversity and inclusion, including the impact of implicit bias, and is a frequent speaker and educator on both. She served on the ABA's Commission on Women in the Profession, and she is the co-author of a nationally acclaimed report, Visible Invisibility: Women of Color in Law Firms. Following the launch of that report, Ms. Paulette formed the Women of Color Law Collective, providing a safe environment for women of color, focusing on cross-generational, personal, and professional development. Ms. Paulette is the co-author of Left Out and Left Behind: The Hurdles, Hassles, and Heartaches of Achieving Long-Term Legal Careers for Women of Color. Joining her today in this discussion is Eileen Letts. Eileen is a premier civil trial attorney with dozens of jury trials and over 100 bench trials, often to Fortune 500 companies and iconic government entities. Ms. Letts has won high-stakes trials in a wide variety of subject matter areas, to include product liability, complex tort, insurance coverage, and commercial disputes. She's achieved favorable outcomes in over 88% of her trials. She's a frequent presenter at continuing legal education seminars and panel discussions of the American Bar Association, the Chicago Bar Association, and the Illinois Institute of Continuing Legal Education. Ms. Letts possesses deep roots in the Chicago political community. As an example, she served on the transition team of Chicago Mayor-elect Harold Washington. Ms. Letts began her career clerking for the Honorable Glenn T. Johnson, Justice of the Illinois Appellate Court from 1978 to 1980. She currently is a partner at Zuber Lawler, and I am happy and honored to present to you both Paulette Brown and Eileen Letts.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to be here. Kia, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And yes, I know I have called Miss Paulette by a few of you, and that makes me feel, it reminds me of when I was young and my mother would have me call people Miss Joyce or Miss Kia or something like that, meaning that they were old. But anyway, I'm really happy to be here, and I want to first say that this conference has been phenomenal. I cannot imagine all of the hard work that went into the organization and the planning and ensuring that everything went smoothly. So just so much thank you for that. I also want to say that, you didn't see me before because I wasn't properly dressed. So I saw Paula, and so I'm channeling her energy by wearing this red, and I'm channeling the energy of Corey by wearing my necklace from Nigeria. So with that, I'd like to get started, and I see Eileen is already laughing at me. Yes, I am corny, I can't help it. So what we're here to talk about is Left Out and Left Behind, the report, the study that Eileen and I and Dr. Destiny Perry had an opportunity to co-author not that long ago. And I know that there are certain things that this very capable, educated group knows already. And so we're going to try to elevate the discussion in some ways so that it can be really a benefit to you. So I'm going to get started and just give you some background as to why the report was done in the first place. Are there slides? Can someone help me with the slides? I forgot about the slides. I'm so busy talking, I forgot about the slides. Thank you. So we can go now to the next slide, actually. I'm going to just keep talking while we go to the next slide. So the first, Hillary Bass was president of the ABA, and she decided that she wanted, as one of her major initiatives, a study and report on the long-term careers of women in law. And there's a report that came out. Some of you may have seen it. It's called Walking Out the Door. And when I heard that they were going to do this report, I thought to myself, having practiced more than 40 years, as Kia mentioned, I thought about the fact that I had been a trial lawyer at one point in my life and a litigator at one point in my life. And as I thought about that, and I thought about people who were of my generation, who were litigators or trial lawyers around the country, and I could name all of them. And that is not a good thing, the fact that I could name all of them. And so that means that obviously something has happened to women of color, that they are no longer, at least not litigators or in the profession or in law firms. And so I talked to the people who were the co-chairs of this initiative and to Hillary and said, when we talk about the long-term careers of women in law, with so many other things, we're not talking about, when we talk about women and their long-term careers, we're not necessarily talking about the experiences of women of color. And, because generally there is a default to white women. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to have a parallel study to examine what has happened to women of color in the legal profession. And since I had beat her up so badly as chair of my 360 Commission, when I was president of the ABA, I asked her, would she co-chair with me? And she said yes. So, the other thing, the other reason is that we have to really be careful when we talk about women and women in general and anything related to women in general, you know, there's a detriment of just being absorbed and we completely lose who we are. And so that's one of the things, and we have to be able to tell our own story. We don't want anybody defining our narrative, because our narrative can only be told by ourselves. And even within all of the different groups of women of color, it's not a monolith. And so there are different stories that we're going to talk about a little later, to make a real clear understanding that we could not be absorbed into this dynamic of what the experiences of women are. And we're going to get in a little bit into the statistics and just all the various reports that really demonstrate that not only women of color, but Black women in particular, fare so poorly in the legal profession, and actually generally in every discipline throughout the country. And so, you know, we want to talk about our barriers and how people see our barriers basically as invisible, and, you know, the impact of all of that, and so why it is so necessary to really put this on Front Street. You know, it is beyond time that we talk about this in an open and frank way, and to be courageous, as Corey talked about earlier, and not back away or shy away from what the actual facts are. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Eileen to talk about, you know, what it is, what the study comprised, et cetera.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Whitney. Go ahead.
It's a pleasure to join all of you this afternoon to talk about left out and left behind. I'm not sure where the slide disappeared to, but we'll move on without it. I can do that. What we did was try to come up with a group of women and a number that we could go and survey and meet with to come up with some different results. And we talked to Dr. Destiny Perry about what we would need for that. And she said we would need at least 100 women to make it a valid report and statistically accurate. So we started out down that path, and we actually had prepared a survey. We went out, but we were only able to get about 38 women. And what we had decided to do, as Paulette mentioned, we're trying to find a number of women of color that are still practicing what the other study had been 20 years. We went down to 15. And still is finding, using the years of 15 years of practice, what we still found was a very limited number of women that were able to participate. So we got 38 women, and that clearly was not enough. So what we had a conversation and said, okay, well, we can reach out and do the survey over the phone. So that's what happened. So Dr. Perry did the survey that way.
Online.
Online. I said on the phone, didn't I? Online. I'm having some feedback, so I'm struggling here a little. Maybe that'll do it. Okay. Yes, online. So the women of color, what we found too is that the women of color reported, being the subject of bias and stereotyping and held to a higher standard than white men or white women. That was one of the things that we found. We found several other things too, which I will restate to you, that while women of color share similar experiences compared with white women, they have very distinct experiences from them. And not only women of color, then you have to break it down into the different ethnicities of the women, because Black women have different experiences than Hispanic women, and different experiences than Asian women, and different experiences than Native American women. But a lot of times people want to assume that all women are together, and if it's not all women, then let's separate out women of color, and women of color all have the same experiences. And we found that not to be the case, and that there are a lot of stereotypes attributed to the different groups of women, as African American women are considered to be very aggressive or assertive. That's kind of, they walk in the room, and that is what a lot of people think. That people think that Hispanic women are more docile, and they just want to keep their job and get along, as well as Asian women are similarly situated to that they just want to also be very, don't want to be confrontational. So these are the stereotypes that are already attributed to women of color as they walk in the room to have any conversations with anybody. So that is one of the barriers to them being treated equally and some of the biases that they face. And then we talk about there's a disconnect between white women and women's initiatives with respect to unique concerns and experiences of women of color. I think that we need to get on a better path of that. And there was this study called This Talk Isn't Cheap, where we find this as well in our study, that white women think that all women are the same, whereas women of color know that they aren't. And women of color know that they have two things against them, shall we say, or for them, however you choose to look at it, but that as they walk in the room, they see themselves as being a person of color first before they get to the issue of being a woman. And they believe they are judged on that basis, which I believe our study bears out, and that's why there are all these biases. So therefore, white women think that, oh, we're all the same, and why can't understand why we don't think the same and feel the same. It's because we as women of color have these two barriers in front of us. First, being a woman of color, which we have to handle, and then a woman, and white women do not have that. And there's also a persistent inequality in the distribution of resources and opportunities that we found in the workplace, that oftentimes men are given those opportunities because they're buddies with somebody. Somebody says, oh, let's just give this work to Jim. Jim's been doing a good job. They don't even think about Joni and giving Joni the work because we've been working with Jim and we're comfortable with Jim. We feel good about Jim. We don't have to think about, are there any extra things that we might have to deal with internally that these men feel this way. So that it's a very unequal system that women start out with when they are in the workforce and are trying to get equal distribution of work. I think next slide would be for you, Paulette. You're on mute. You're on mute. Okay.
I'm on now. So I'm going to have to pretend that you see these slides that I worked so hard to put together. Maybe we can put them in the chat or something like that. Some other
yeah, we're trying to get the share back on. Just give us a minute, or we'll also attach it in the chat.
Right,
so,
right. And attaching it in the chat, Whitney, is perfectly fine. Don't even worry about it right now. Just don't. So you know, you worked hard enough through this. So, but the thing is, thinking back to, and I know that some of you have read Visible Invisibility, Women of Color in Law Firms, which came out in 2006. And, one of the things that it showed was that 85% of women of color leave their law firms within 5 years of being there. And so I personally believe that is part of the problem that we had in finding enough women to participate in our study, because they were just all gone. And, there are a lot of excuses as to why they have gone. We're hearing so many different things. One of the popular things that people like to say, well, we can't keep Black associates, or we can't keep women of color associates because the clients steal them. We know that is a myth. And we have to do everything to dispel that. So, we look at 2006 and what happened. Then we skip to 2009 with the impact of the Great Recession, that one Great Recession anyway. And then we look to 2020 and to what this latest report has informs us. And basically the issues remain the same. There's a marginalization, the negative stereotypes, the lack of access, the lack of sponsorship, the lack of opportunities. And when we merge all of those things together and we think about it, and I only see through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those of you who know me know that if you slit my wrist, that's what, no blood would come out, little D, E's, and I's would come out instead. And so I am constantly, as I know you are, thinking about this and what it is we can do to change this dynamic. We know that we are constantly marginalized. We know that as a result of COVID, we are having even fewer opportunities than we had before. We understand that we need sponsors rather than mentors, because mentors talk to you, sponsors talk about you. And so we have to get to a point where there's an understanding of that, and take some of the lessons that Paula taught us earlier today about how do we talk to these white male leaders? How do we get them to understand what exactly it is that's going on? And so we can't continue to talk about what the problem is. I think that all of us in this meeting today have a very good idea as to what the problem is. We may not think always about the magnitude of the problem, but the problems are there. We know that they're there. And so it is time for us to figure out what it is we're going to do with these problems. And so, what it is, not just the big negative stereotypes, but the micro stereotypes too. And the fact that, the women who we are trying to guide and try to coach and try to bring along so that other people can see them, so that they can become visible in the firm. How do we get past the point where they have to prove it again, the PIA concept, prove it again, prove it again, prove it again, and how they are minimized. And no matter how well they do a particular thing one time, they've got to demonstrate over the next time that they can do it again, and stop getting the continuously discrete projects. So those are the things that are continuously being faced by women of color. And I would say that Black women, probably more than other women. And we also have to be careful about talking about people of color and women of color. So, because you don't want one group to be absorbed in another group, we want there to be distinctions, and each group has its own set of issues, and all of them separate and apart from white women, all of them separate and apart from men of color, all of them separate and apart from white men, obviously. And so, we have to think about those things. And one of the things Eileen mentioned, this talk isn't cheap. One of the things that they touched on, but not in a big way, but I happened to speak on a panel about this report about 14 months ago. And one of the things that we talked about that people also don't talk about is colorism, and the impact that colorism has on how people are treated in law firms, how they're able to progress in law firms. And I think that as we talk about how women of color are treated, we have to think about colorism as well. I think we're ready for the next slide, which is talking about, the urgency of now. Dr. Martin Luther King talked to us about the urgency of now and why it is important for us to take action now. Actually, the time is past due. And so, I think that in order to progress in almost anything that we do, sometimes we have to look back before we can look forward. We have to understand what the data is, what the history has been, what is going on in your organization, who has been used for certain things, or better yet, who has not been selected for certain things, and what are the reasons why. And so we have to put our leaders in a position where they look back at how people treated in the different circumstances, and did we make an exception here? And if a client has a friend who wants a position, even though we do not have an opening in that position, do we create an opening in that office? And so how are we treating people differently based on their genetics or other factors, as to what it is? And then do we talk about who was successful in a particular firm? And then we look, going back a minute to the colorism, what exactly did they look like? And did they really identify? When you see that they're listed in the diversity statistics as a person of color, then do you go to their bio and see what they really identify with? I'm just saying. So, but look at all of these different things to determine what it is and how you're going to respond. And so what the data tells us is that Black women remain the least represented of every demographic. People are talking about, they're doing better than they did in 2018, and in 2019, they've made progress. Well, it's whoop-de-doo. They went from 0.68% of partners to 0.75%. That is not good in my estimation. And there's still only 2.8% of all associates in law firm. And then just generally, women of color are the most underrepresented. Asian partners are 1.46%, associates 7.1%, Latinx partners 0.80%, and associates 0.70%. And with regard to Native Americans, no statistical reliable information as it relates to partners. So this is not, as Courtney just wrote in there, no, it is not progress. And I am telling you that we really have to take some definitive action, because I've been practicing 44 years and I've practiced till apparently my practicing has not generated good results. And efforts, that's what we have. One of the things we have to do is we have to stop talking about diversity, inclusion efforts, diversity, belonging efforts, all of those things. We have to talk about what are the results, not what the efforts are, not what the initiatives are, but what the results are. And so I am going to stop for now, because I'll probably, Eileen is laughing at me.
Wearing yourself out.
Yes, I'm about to jump out of the window, because we have got to do something that is going to bring about systemic change, and it's up to us as the professionals in this arena to make that happen. And more on that later, Eileen, so I can calm down and catch.
Just to talk a little bit, next slide, if we could, please. To talk a little bit about what's in the study and what we found, that, as we've said earlier, it's not a monolith. The comments really are very painful to hear. I know someone wrote in the chat, Corey wrote in the chat, these numbers are so painful. Well, the comments are equally painful. When you see, such as this first one, a Black woman in her mid-40s talking about having to deal with assumptions of inferiority, intellectual or otherwise, and constantly, as Paulette mentioned earlier, the PIA says to prove it again and again. It doesn't matter how senior or how qualified she is, she still has to continue to do this. And this woman says, it is psychologically exhausting. And I think so many women of color can relate to that it is. I know one woman has said to me that she parks her real self at the door before she goes into the office every day. And to have to continually have to do that is so very painful, because you have to wear more than one face. You cannot be your authentic self, as so many people talk about being their authentic selves. Well, women of color cannot be their authentic selves in the workplace, because it's just not, because if they are, they're probably not going to last for very long. Then we talk about a 41-year-old Black woman who says, despite being on a team headed by a woman, she felt that there was a bias towards the white women on the team, who often receive better assignments, better mentorships, and great visibility. And a thought I've always had about one of the reasons I think sometimes that white women do better is because the white men see themselves as that's their mother, that's their sister, that's their daughter, whereas they don't see that as women of color. But as white women, they can relate to white women on a level that is more equal than they can relate to women of color. And so therefore, the white women probably are, as this woman perceived, getting better assignments, having better relationships with people in the firm than she can have. And then, not turning for a moment, then if you look at the next comment about a 68-year-old Asian woman, and she said, which I'm sure so many women, and I've said it myself before, is it me? That, she said, while it's happening, things happen, and you go and you speak with other women of color, and we found this a lot, that they all said, oh, well, no, it's not you. It is not you. It is what is happening. It is, your perceptions are not incorrect. You are being treated inequitably. There is bias, and what is happening to you is real, but it is not you. But how does one overcome it is not me syndrome? Because it's not you, but then what do you do about that? So we talk about so many stereotypes, And that one thing too, that's not in one of the slides, that is a comment that I found also very, very telling, is that a 56-year-old Black woman said, men exhibiting confidence are applauded. Women exhibiting confidence are either viewed as cocky or the B word. So where does that leave you? Leaving yourself at the door. So let's go on, if we could, then to the next slide. If we could, which talks about, this is also just another continuation, but this one is really, I think, worth, I'm not sure everyone can see it, so I will read it. That a 55-year-old Latinx woman said, I think judges expected me to be dumb and unprepared. They compliment me, though, as I'm an exception. I have judges try to correct my English skills. I had a prosecutor inferred that I was illegal. One of the smartest women I know stopped practicing immigration law because of the way she was undermined. The judges would only talk about her hairstyle and not about the quality of her argument. I have heard judges complain about women being bitchy. A judge denied a continuance to a woman who just had a baby, and when she appeared with a baby in tow, he held her in contempt. So these are just a few of the stories, and I'll tell you one real quick one about myself. I too have practiced law over 40 years, although Paulette will say she's practiced longer, and that's okay. But I too have practiced over 40 years. And I had a conversation with a woman lawyer on the phone, never seen each other. She was going to intervene in a case that I was involved in. I told her about the woman who was pro se. It's a pro se plaintiff. I represented a defendant, and that the woman was somewhat not too together, seemed to have a few mental issues, but that she had been carrying on this case on her own. But this lawyer, white lawyer, was going to meet me in court, excuse me, to intervene. I get to court, I'm dressed professionally, and she said to me, okay, are we now waiting for the lawyer? This happened within the last couple of years. So, these things are, very disturbing, disheartening, and very challenging. And as has been said so often, extremely, extremely exhausting. So I think we could go, Paulette. Oh, the next slide is also mine. So sorry. Resilience. Could we go to the next slide, please? So why, after hearing all of what we've already said for the last few minutes, why do women of color stay? Well, several reasons. One, they're the breadwinners. They are the women, they are the ones that bring in the money into the family. They might often, as we found, make more money than their significant other. So they stay because they have to continue to make the money. And we found that a lot of reasons, kind of on the opposite side, that white women are able to leave is because they're not the primary breadwinner, that they have a significant other or a spouse or someone else to rely on to continue to bring in the income, so that if they are unhappy, they can leave. Women of color, most of the time, cannot leave. We talk about cultural expectations, and this is so true of so many women, and I know particularly, I can speak as a Black woman in particular, that, a lot of times we are the first to have gone to college. We are the first to have completed a graduate education and to have become a lawyer. And we have so many family members that are so happy and so excited and just thrilled that we have achieved this. How could we ever stop practicing law and give an explanation and say, we weren't treated well. They were unfair. They were biased. That is not going to really hold a lot of water with family members. And it is very cultural for us to do that. And it's very cultural, and it's truly the same in other cultures as well, that we have achieved this level of professionalism. So how could we therefore turn our backs on it because we're not happy? Excuse me just a moment. And also the next point, we're role models. We're role models not only internally at the firm, but externally. But for a moment, talking about how we are internal role models, if we are in a position of leadership in the firm, or have at least achieved a level of security, we're a partner in the firm, then we have others who are coming up behind us that are looking to us and saying, oh, I want to be like her, or, oh, there is hope for me to get to that position. Oh, I can take some problems that I'm having along the way because she made it. She's there. I can go to her. I have her as someone who will support me. And then you look externally. role models. We're role models in the community. We are often involved in many philanthropic philanthropic matters, philanthropic organizations that we are very supportive. We are looked upon as a leader inside and outside the organization, and therefore we are role models to others. And that is a heavy burden, but it is one many of us have chosen to take. And we have fewer opportunities outside the law firm. We don't have that book of business that many white men have, that even many white women have, that is portable, that we can go from one firm to another. If we're not happy at one firm, we can go to another firm. We have not been given that level of responsibility and that client contact, that client involvement to develop those relationships so that we have the business to take with us. So where are we going to go? And we are survivors. And I take that in line with love of the law. Paulette and I talked about this before, that she was surprised by so many people being so unhappy, but they love the law and they stayed. And that is so true. I take a quote from one of the women in our study that said, "I love the law. For the most part, I love what I do. And I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 7 years old." So when you have those kinds of dynamics and you have that love of the law, you are willing to take on a lot of additional burdens that you might not take on but for the love of the law and but for your other responsibilities and commitments that you feel as a woman of color that you need to contribute and stay in place at that workplace. I think now, Paulette, I do think.
So, I just thank you, Eileen. So, it's interesting because some of the very reasons why women of color stay in the law is the reason why white women leave. So they leave because they have to become the caregivers, and they have to assume other responsibilities that women of color have always had. And that is the reason why we have to stay, because we sometimes, especially if we're the first ones in the family, like yours truly, first college, first law school for sure, that people are going to rely on you. They're going to think that you have some economic stability that is greater than theirs, and you are going to be the go-to person to answer all of the questions, all the legal questions. You're going to be the go-to person if somebody is in a pinch, that they are going to maybe look to you for financial support. Whereas, in the walking out of the door, which generally focused on white women, it was the opposite. They left to take care of people. And, there's so many different things that are culturally different. Even when we think about the impact on us during this COVID-19, the impact on our women of color in law firms, and the fact, I've talked to other women, white women, who have talked about, oh, it's been, it's back to kind of normal because I've got my nanny here, and so I can work while the nanny is here. Well, guess what? Black women mostly women of color, we don't have nannies. That is not a part of who we are or our culture. So, we have to have people to understand that, just because something works for one group of people does not mean it works for everyone or for every group of people or every demographic of people, and sometimes people will look at you sideways, but when they look at you sideways, when you start to talk about the differences between women of color and white women, they're looking at you sideways. You got to look at them straight forward in the eye, like Jack Nicholson, mano y mano, and tell them that they are just wrong, that they have to really consider the fact that everybody is not the same. And so, when we think about, all of what's going on, and I'm sure that Eileen and I have not told you anything that you don't already know. And so where does that lead us? And so we get these reports, a million reports are coming out all of the time. You've got this report, you've got the this talk isn't cheap, but sometimes talk is cheap because nobody does anything about it except to talk. And we think about the reports by Lean In and McKinsey. We think about, all the other various reports that have come out that consistently talk about, what it is we're going to do and what the statistics are. And Black women fare worse than anybody else across all industries. And, Latinx women, and Asian women and Native women. And we hear all these things about all the bad things that are happening to us all of the time. And we have to understand that these are structural aggressions that have been built into every system that is in place. And so we have to figure out how we are not just going to let this report be another dust collector on the shelf. We are going to have to see some action so that when I'm sitting on my deck drinking my mint juleps, rocking in my chair, I can look at this next report and say, progress has been made. And so, people talk about now the urgency of now, what is happening. There's, things feel different now, that there's some new awakening now. But as we continue to talk about these race issues and all that's been going on, do you get the sense that people are becoming tone deaf to it? And so, there was a lot of talk about, law firms have formed race and equity task forces, and, which I've got mixed feelings about, because you've got your DEI, belonging, et cetera, programs. And so isn't that all a part of it? And so why do you need these extra things? Just stop creating initiatives and do what it is that you're supposed to do. And so you can't, I do agree that you have to have some talk, that you have to have more than talk, it has to move to a conversation. You have to have people who are going to actually listen rather than hear what you have to say. And so we have to develop tools or create circumstances, create small circles so that we can explain things. Sometimes we grow weary of explaining things. And I know that sometimes when I've done training, I've talked about different buzzwords that sort of set people off, that like somebody said, oh, you're so articulate. And a white man will tell me, well, what's wrong with saying that? And why is that offensive? I said, it's offensive because in the manner in which you say it, me being articulate is unexpected. And so they don't quite get that. And so, sometimes people will say to you, like he said to me, well, can I have a list? Can you make me a list of everything that I should be saying? And I was like, really offended by that. But then I said, well, if that's going to help this young person, this young man, and I'm using that generously, if that's going to help this young man, then that's what we have to do. We have to use every tool that's in our box to make people understand how it's different. And again, we have to make sure that we are with them. A lot of times it can be time consuming. It can be exhausting. Sometimes we have to talk to people one-on-one to have them to understand. And in the process, we're going to be criticized for doing our job. But we can't be deterred from doing our job. And I know it's easy for me to say because I've been around so long, because basically my position is that there's nothing that they can do to me that has not already been done to me. And so I am going to use whatever leverage that I have to push as far as I possibly can. And so we have to really talk. We have to have the conversations. We have to undertake a comprehensive review with the leaders of the firm to find out where it is and where we haven't been. And then we have to take action. We have to set forth metrics. We have to, I'm sure everybody has a strategic plan for diversity and inclusion, or by whatever name that you're calling it. And what are your goals? And how are those goals being measured? And when you report to your executive committee or on a regular basis, what are you telling them that it is that they have to do? What are the specific things that they have to do that will make them accountable to ensuring that there is some change and that we are not talking about this 20 years from now? And so, the thing is, as I mentioned before, It is important education. You know, I don't necessarily like to call it training. I like to call it constant education. And we also know that when we tell people related to D&I that, you know, that they're going to lose it. And studies show that when you talk about things like D&I, people do lose it after 4 months. So it's really critical that no matter what kind of mechanism that you're using, you have to educate people over and over and over again. And I will tell you, the people criticize me because I went back and asked people what it is that they had supposedly learned before, and then they were mad with me because I said I belittled them because they didn't remember what I told them. Well, you know, that is, you have to make them understand that they only feel belittled because they feel entitled, and they don't want you to know something that they don't know. So you got to keep educating them, and you got to tell them over and over and over again if it's necessary. Yes, it is exhausting, but unfortunately, that is our calling in life. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And so the education has to be consistent. It has to be persistent. And it can be weary, but we cannot let up. We have to continue to repeat the message as long as it needs to be repeating. And somebody asked, my chairman asked me, what did success look like for me? I said, it is when somebody starts talking about these issues and dealing with these issues and taking action on these issues as though it was their idea and not mine. And so that is success to me, because that means it is starting to be ingrained into all that needs to be done. We can't do anything without having goals. So what are our goals? So many of you have seen Reed Smith. They have been a little bit bold. Baker Donaldson is becoming a little bit bold, and there's some others. But your goals have to be transparent. People have to know what it is that you say that you're going to do, because then you can be held accountable. People can say, oh, you said you were going to do this. I mean, that happens in a lot of arenas. What's going on right now? Politically, not so much. But we have to have goals, and we have to have metrics, and we have to be accountable. So I think that everybody has seen Reed Smith. They said that by 2024, they're going to increase their Black lawyer population by 50%. By 2024, they're going to increase their Black leadership by 30%. And then by 2024, they're going to have the attrition rates the same across the board for all demographics. And so, you know, they have gotten some criticism with regard to just saying Black people. But if you look from a historical perspective, Black people have been discriminated the longest, maybe not as long as Native Americans, but the systems have been put into place for the last 400 years so that we will not be able to succeed and not be able to be the best that we can be because of the systemic racism that has occurred. And so we have to set these transparent goals where we post them on our website so that the world can see that this is what we say that we're going to do. And when we know that when people are watching us, that people are more likely to behave, so to speak. It's just like when you are in the room, people are not necessarily going to say certain things with you being in the room. And so it is the same thing about the transparency and the goals and the metrics that you have to share. And so, you know, you have to push things. Sometimes it is in increments. You know, what is the policy with your firm for partners? You know, do they have to generate a certain number of hours that they spend on advancing diversity and inclusion in the law firm? And what happens to them? You know, Eileen likes to talk about, I like to talk about it too. What is most appropriate if people don't do this? You know, do they get a carrot or do they get a stick? Do we reward them when they do what is supposed to be a core value of the firm? Do we reward them in the same way where they satisfy the other core values in the firm? Or is there a stick that is imposed if they don't conform in the same way that they do with the other core values of the firm. And so if it is a core value in the firm, and that's what a lot of firms like to say it is, then it has to be treated in the same way as every other core value of the firm. We're not going to be working at it. You know, there's no explanation. Did you meet your billable hour requirement this month? It's a yes or no. And then maybe you get to explain why you didn't. And so did you meet your requirements on how you've advanced diversity and inclusion this month? It's a yes or no. It's not an explanation first. It's a yes or no. And if the answer is no, what are the consequences of not doing it? So if diversity and inclusion is one of the goals of your firm, it has to be treated like every other goal in your firm. And then you know, I don't know what your particular situation is, but I had the good fortune of creating my own position description. And so, you know, my chairman, you know, he said, well, you report to the 3 co-chairs of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm like, no, I only report to one person, and that's the chairperson. And so I said, I can't have all these masters. It's enough that I live on the plantation. So, but I can't have a bunch of masters. And so what happens is, and your title sometimes makes a difference. So I have the title of chief. So anybody with the title of chief is on the executive team. And so that allows me in the room. So think of things, you know, look at your firm structure and see, you know, whether a title that you have, no matter what, how much money you're making, you know, what title, how much influence are you going to be in that room with the other members of the executive team, including the executive committee, while they're making decisions and you're there. So, you know, they're not going to say too many crazy things, but make sure that if you can be in a position to be at the table so that you can hear conversations, so that you can offer input, because every single thing that happens in the firm has an impact on diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. So, you know, it permeates, and it should permeate throughout the entire culture of the firm and everything that's happened, that you do. So if we can go to the next firm, and I can't believe I've been talking this long. Well, if we can go to the next slide. So the title is what the DEI professionals have to do with it. And you see my picture of Tina Turner. We have to, and I know that all of you do, we have to inject ourselves more into various processes. You know, I know that it's time consuming, but, you know, every Thursday, I know that I've got a hiring committee meeting, and I am looking at every open position in the firm, and I am looking to see, you know, who is in line, who is being considered, and where are we looking for people, and what are we telling our recruiters as to who it is they want, who we want them to send to us. You know, we've got to look at alternatives. We've got to look at, you know, who it is that we are being considered for various lateral positions and for partner positions. And so we've got to inject ourselves in every single place that we can. It causes me to work more hours than I'd like to, but I know that in order to move the needle in real ways, that sometimes we have to be a lot of places at a lot of times. I don't have the luxury that some of you have. I've got one diversity coordinator. It's just us. We have to do everything. But to me, it's worth it because that's the only way, again, we can see some fundamental change. And so one of the things, you know, look at, you know, who's mentoring who, who's sponsoring who, you know, you got to tell them, you got to tell someone else about how good someone else is. And so I will tell you that one of the things that I was able to get done is I was able to create a sponsorship program. And so we started with the executive committee, and everybody on the executive committee was voluntold that they had to sponsor another diverse lawyer. And then we ran out, thank goodness, and then we went to department chairs, and then we went to the people in the top 10% of moneymakers to sponsor a person. And it's you know, their job is to tell someone else about the person who they are mentoring, sponsoring, to tell them how good they are and to put them on the map. And then, you know, and people don't like me for it, but you know, so a lot of times when you do your job, people don't like you. So there's an accountability tool that they have to produce on a quarterly basis. They have to say, especially in this time of COVID when we can't see people, they have to say how frequently they've talked to their mentee. They have to tell me how they worked on their business, personal and professional business plan. They've got to tell me whether they are meeting their benchmarks for their particular practice groups. They got to tell me who they've introduced them to in the firm, and how much work that they have personally given them. And so, you know, it's like 11 questions that they've got to respond to. But if you don't have accountability tools for people to use something in front of them, it's easy for them not to talk to them. It's easy for them to go about their business. So sometimes you have to create some really tangible things that people can use as tools. And then you know, we've got to look at this issue of intersectionality, you know, layering on different processes. And so, again, you know, we think about how women of color don't seem to fit in with the women's initiatives and so forth. And so we've got to look at that. And one of the other things, and so how are we different? And don't let women of color be co-opted by other women. You know, all women, I'm not suggesting that all white women are the same, but you can't let the issues be co-opted and then it just becomes the issue. It can't be, what about me? What about me? You know, like the cute little video that we saw earlier today. And then, you know, I am a believer in stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews. I don't know whether any of you are doing them now, but when you have stay interviews, people are more likely to stay because you can catch issues before they start to happen. And then create circles of conversation. You know, so there are a lot of white women, for example, that say that they have no clue, that they're absolutely shocked by the information that came out in this talk isn't cheap. And they say that, so we've got to create some circles of conversation. It's not going to be comfortable for me. It's not going to be comfortable for you, and it's not going to be comfortable for the people who we're trying to get to understand us. But it's something that we have to do, and we are not unaccustomed to moving towards things that are not comfortable for them. And so, you know, why is it that we do this? Why is it necessary? Why do we have to respond to the urgency of now? Because as DEI professionals, it's what it is that we do. It's what it is that we love. And in order for us to ensure that there is some systemic change, we have to create, first we've got to tear down a lot of the structures that currently exist, and then we have to build inclusive structures so that we can move forward, so that we will not have these devastating numbers 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. So we want to be in a place where all other white women are. They are not satisfied with being 22% of partnerships. I want us to be able to move in that direction. You know, are we going to increase the percentage of Black women partners by 100%? That would only get us to 1.5%. So I think that those are not necessarily too aggressive objectives, but I think that we have to be bold. We don't have time for incremental small baby steps anymore. We've got to make large incremental steps, and we have to do more than one thing at a time. Well, that we can't say, well, let's just do this one thing right now and we'll take care of the white women right now, and then we'll bring in the women of color. And guess what? They never come into the picture. We never consider them. And so we have to understand that we have the capacity to do multiple things at one time, and we have to convince our firms that more than one train can run along a track. There can be multiple tracks that run along the same way at the same time. And when we have the understanding and when we keep plugging at it and educating and being persistent and consistent in our message, hopefully it'll sink in and we won't be here talking about this 10 years from now. And so I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. It seems like our time has run out, but the last slide is just some resources that you can refer to where some of the information was, where we got some of the information. I don't know whether there's any time for questions. I know this is the last session of the day. I know that you all exhausted because it's been a great program. And yes, hopefully from my lips to God's ears, change is gonna come. Oh yes, it will, Sam Cooke. Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Paulette, so much, Ms. Eileen, and for everyone who participated in today's discussion. The slide deck is. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder that that we do now have a 15-minute break before the next session. So feel free to join folks at the networking table or use this as your opportunity to check emails and all that other stuff. See you soon.